She didn't notice the moment she began shrinking for him. It wasn't obvious. It wasn't loud. It was subtle. The kind of change that happens in the pauses, in the glances, in the quiet moments where she told herself, "It's not a big deal. I just want to make things work." In the beginning, his affection felt warm, safe, almost. He said the right things, looked at her in ways she had always hoped someone would. He made her feel chosen, for a while. But slowly, something inside her began to shift. She found herself thinking twice before speaking, measuring every word, every expression, every desire, afraid that one wrong move might make her too much for him. She apologized for things that weren't her fault. She softened pieces of herself that he didn't understand. She dimmed parts of her personality just to keep the peace. And when he pulled away, emotionally, silently, unpredictably, she didn't question his distance. She questioned her own worth. She thought love required effort, and it does. But she didn't realize that she was doing the effort of two people. She was carrying the relationship on her back, on her silence, on her self-abandonment. Every time he grew cold, she found a new way to blame herself. Maybe she was too emotional. Maybe she cared too much. Maybe she didn't care enough. Maybe she wasn't pretty enough, interesting enough, strong enough, easy enough. She twisted herself into shapes that didn't belong to her. Shapes she didn't recognize, but shapes he seemed to prefer. And somewhere along the way, she accepted a lie so deeply that it shaped her identity. Love is earned. Affection is conditional. Presence is a reward, and she must be perfect to deserve any of it. She stayed longer than her heart wanted to. Not because it felt right, but because leaving felt like failure. Because she believed that if she just tried a little harder, loved a little better, held herself a little tighter, he would finally choose her the way she chose him. But he never did. And every day, as she waited for the love she was giving, she slowly lost the love she had for herself. One night, a night that felt heavier than the others, she found herself sitting alone on the floor, hands trembling, breathing shallow, feeling a pain she didn't know how to put into words. It wasn't heartbreak. It was self-betrayal. The realization that she had sacrificed her voice, her dignity, her tenderness, just to be chosen by someone who never wanted to see her deeply in the first place. She didn't cry at first. She just stared at the silence around her and whispered the question that broke everything open. Why wasn't I enough for him? And in that moment, something inside her shattered. But something else awakened. Because the question wasn't the truth. The question was the prison. She didn't lose him. She lost herself trying to be loved by him. And that was the wound that finally demanded healing. This is the story of how she learned that real love is not earned with pain, or silence, or self-erasing sacrifice. This is the story of how she found the courage to stop begging for the bare minimum, and start believing she was made for something whole, something steady, something true. This is the story of how she unlearned a love that broke her, and learned a love that freed her. She didn't notice it at first. The shift was small, almost invisible. The kind of change that feels harmless until it becomes everything. In the beginning, his love felt warm, effortless, natural. She didn't have to try. She didn't have to overthink. She didn't have to earn anything. Or at least, that's what she believed. But slowly, love stopped feeling like a gift and started feeling like a test. One she never studied for, one she was terrified to fail. It began with little things. The way he pulled back when she was honest. The way he went quiet when she needed him. The way affection seemed to appear and disappear depending on how perfect she behaved. She learned to measure her tone, soften her opinions, swallow her needs. Not because he asked, but because she feared losing the version of him that felt safe. She didn't know that real love isn't supposed to have versions. She started rehearsing conversations in her head before speaking. She changed outfits 2 or 3 times before seeing him, telling herself she just wanted to look good, when the truth was simpler. She was afraid that one wrong detail would be the reason he pulled away again. When he became distant, she didn't wonder what had changed in him. She wondered what was wrong with her. She replayed every moment they shared, searching for the invisible mistake she must have made. How did she upset him? What did she say wrong? What wasn't she giving? Where did she fail? Love had become a performance, a quiet audition where she was always afraid of losing the part. And the worst part? She didn't call it fear. She called it love. She called it compromise. She called it maturity. But deep down, it was something darker. The belief that her worth was conditional, fragile, easily replaced. Every moment with him felt like holding her breath. Every compliment felt like a reward. Every silence felt like punishment. She lived suspended between hope and dread, wanting him to stay, terrified she wasn't enough to make him choose her. Some nights, lying awake beside a phone that didn't ring, she whispered the truth she didn't want anyone else to hear. Why do I have to work so hard to be loved? And that question echoed deeper than she expected. Because she wasn't just trying to win his love. She was trying to win back pieces of herself she had lost along the way. His love became a test. But the real test was surviving the version of herself she became trying to keep him. There is a particular kind of silence that feels heavier than anger. A silence that doesn't explain, doesn't reassure, doesn't hold space. A silence that makes you question yourself more than the person who created it. That was the silence she lived with. Whenever he pulled away, whenever he turned colder, slower, distant, he didn't say a word. He didn't tell her what was wrong. He didn't share what he felt. He simply stepped back and watched her try to fill the empty space with self-blame. He didn't have to accuse her of anything. She did it for him. The moment he withdrew, her mind spiraled into explanations that only hurt her more. She replayed every conversation, every message, every expression on her own face, trying to pinpoint the exact moment she ruined something. She didn't ask, "What happened to him?" She asked, "What's wrong with me?" His distance became a mirror where she saw only her flaws. If he took a little longer to reply, she assumed she'd said too much. If he canceled plans, she assumed she wasn't interesting enough. If he grew quiet, she assumed she had pushed too hard, or expected too much, or existed too loudly. She didn't know that emotional distance is its own kind of communication. She only knew how to internalize it. She bent herself backwards, trying to win him back, sending softer messages, making gentler jokes, trying to be easier, trying to prove she wasn't demanding. But the truth was simple and brutal. She wasn't demanding. She was alone. His silence wasn't a test she needed to pass. It was a piece of truth, one she wasn't ready to face yet. She thought loving him harder would bring him closer again. But love doesn't work like gravity. It doesn't pull someone closer who's already choosing to drift away. Some nights she sat with her phone in her hand, writing and deleting messages, holding on to hope that maybe he would choose her if she could just find the right words. But there were no words that could make someone stay who had already decided to leave in small, silent pieces. And yet, instead of seeing his distance as a reflection of him, she kept seeing it as a sentence on her soul. She mistook his indifference for her inadequacy. She mistook his silence for her failure. She mistook his inconsistency for something she did wrong. And that was the cruelest part. He didn't need to tell her she wasn't enough. She had already learned to carry that lie inside herself. But deep down, beneath the ache and the confusion, a quiet truth waited. A truth she would only discover much later in her healing. Someone else's inability to love her was never proof that she was unworthy of love. She just couldn't see it yet. She didn't wake up one day and decide to lose herself. It happened slowly, in tiny, almost invisible choices that felt harmless at first. Choices she made because she believed that loving him meant becoming easier to love. She didn't call it disappearing. She called it trying. She called it compromise. She called it making the relationship work. But little by little, she started letting go of parts of herself just to keep him close. She stopped sharing her opinions because he didn't like when she disagreed. She stopped showing vulnerability because he said she was too emotional. She stopped asking questions because he made her feel silly for caring too much. She stopped bringing up her needs because she feared he'd see her as demanding. She learned to be quiet in moments she wanted to speak. She learned to be patient in moments she deserved clarity. She learned to smile in moments she wanted to cry. Not because she wanted to be someone else, but because she believed that who she already was wasn't enough. She gave up small things first. Her favorite hobbies, her morning rituals, her softness, her boundaries. Then she gave up bigger things, her voice, her rest, her self-respect. Until eventually, she couldn't remember the last time she recognized the woman in the mirror. What hurt the most was how natural it became to shrink for him. She could feel herself fading, but she told herself it was temporary. Just until he felt secure, just until things improved, just until he saw how loyal she was. But things never improved. And he never saw her loyalty the way she hoped he would. Instead, the more she minimized herself, the more he took. The more she gave, the less he appreciated. The more silent she became, the easier it was for him to pretend her feelings didn't exist. She convinced herself that if she could just become smaller, he would finally have room to love her. But that's the tragedy. He didn't want room. He wanted control. And she was too heartbroken to see it. One night, after bending again to avoid conflict, she felt an ache she could no longer ignore. A feeling like something inside her had snapped quietly, the way a thread breaks after being pulled too tight for too long. It wasn't anger. It was grief. Grief over the parts of herself she had sacrificed in silence. Grief over a love that asked her to disappear to keep it alive. Grief over the realization that she had been holding on to someone who was letting go of her a little more each day. She didn't say it out loud yet, but in the quiet of her soul, a question rose. Fragile, trembling, painful. If he only stays when I disappear, what happens when I finally decide to exist? That question was the first spark of healing, the first breath of courage, the first truth she allowed herself to face. Because love that requires disappearance is not love. It is loss, wearing affection's mask. And she was finally beginning to see the difference. Pain doesn't always come crashing down. Sometimes it arrives slowly, like a tide rising around your ankles, quiet, subtle, almost polite. And then one day, you look down and realize you're drowning. That's how it happened to her. It wasn't a dramatic ending. He didn't shout. He didn't confess anything. He simply became distant in a way that didn't even pretend to hide itself anymore. Messages shorter, calls rarer, affection colder, presence fading like a light you didn't realize was already dying. She tried to hold on, not because the relationship was alive, but because she didn't know who she was without the hope of fixing it. She had built her identity around the possibility that one day he would finally see her as enough. But one small moment changed everything. She remembers it clearly. She had written him a long message, careful, kind, vulnerable. She rewrote it 3 times, making sure it didn't sound needy or overwhelming or too emotional. She pressed send with a heart that still believed in the version of him she loved, and he replied with a single word. Not a sentence, not a thought, not an effort. One word. Careless. Detached, almost offended by her softness. She stared at that message for a long time, long enough to feel something inside her crack, in a way that wasn't loud, but irreversible. It wasn't heartbreak. It was awakening. Because for the first time, she saw the truth without sugar, without excuses. without the fantasy she'd been nurturing to avoid losing him. He didn't love her. Not the way she loved him. Not the way she needed. Not the way she deserved. And worse, she had been loving him so loudly that she didn't notice how quietly he had stopped loving her back. The pain was sharp. It hit her in the chest, in her breath, in the way her hands trembled as she put her phone down. It wasn't rejection. It was revelation. A revelation that forced her to see just how much she had accepted, just how much she had tolerated, just how deeply she had abandoned herself, trying to keep someone who was already gone. She cried that night, not because she lost him, but because she finally realized how much she had lost herself. And in that raw, devastating moment, a different kind of clarity emerged, the kind that only pain can teach. She finally understood that the love she was begging for was too small for her soul, too shallow for her depth, too fragile for her tenderness. She was made for something truer, steadier, wider than the narrow version of love he offered her. The pain didn't destroy her. It woke her. And once she woke up, she knew she couldn't go back to sleep. Not in that relationship. Not in that version of herself. Not in that lie that love must be earned with self-sacrifice. This was the moment her healing began. Not when he left, but when she finally chose to stop leaving herself. She didn't leave because she stopped loving him. She left because she finally understood that staying meant losing herself completely. And for the first time in a long time, her own heart whispered louder than her fear of letting go. The day she walked away was not a triumphant march. There was no anger in her voice, no dramatic final scene, no door slammed behind her. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels like truth. She felt her hands shake as she stepped out, felt her stomach twist, felt grief in places she didn't know could ache. But beneath all that sorrow, there was something else. Something small, fragile, but unmistakably real. Relief. A soft exhale her soul had been holding for far too long. Because choosing herself didn't mean she stopped loving him. It meant she stopped abandoning herself to be loved by him. She didn't leave to punish him. She left to protect the parts of her she had almost forgotten existed. The girl who used to dream. The woman who used to smile easily. The heart that used to feel safe being open. In the weeks that followed, the healing didn't come beautifully wrapped. It came in waves. Unexpected, messy, honest. Some days she felt lighter. Some days she felt empty. Some days she missed the version of him she fell in love with, even if that version had never fully existed. But slowly, very slowly, she began to remember herself. She started speaking without fear of being misunderstood. She started laughing without waiting for permission. She started taking up space without apologizing for needing air. And in the quiet moments when loneliness tried to whisper lies, she learned to answer with truth. I was never too much. I was just too much for someone who was too little for me. What surprised her most was that healing didn't feel like forgetting him. It felt like returning to herself, reclaiming her tenderness, rebuilding her dignity, rediscovering the woman she had buried to keep a love that never wanted to stay. She realized something sacred, one of the most freeing truths she'd ever learn. Real love doesn't dim your light. It protects it. It nurtures it. It stands beside it without fear. She spent years believing she had to earn affection, prove her worth, shrink her voice, bend her soul just to be chosen. But now she knows. The love she was begging for was far too small for the woman she is becoming. So she walks forward, not healed all at once, not fearless, not untouched by the past, but whole enough to begin again. With a heart that knows the difference between being needed and being valued, between being tolerated and being loved, between surviving a relationship and being cherished within one. She didn't choose loneliness. She chose truth. She chose peace. She chose dignity. She chose herself. And that choice, quiet, trembling, sacred, is the moment her new life finally began.